Hi, I'm your host Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. All right, so we're joined here today by Carl Thomas. Carl, say a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Dave, hi. Thanks for having me on. So my name's Carl. I have a background in telecommunications. I used to run an ISP, an internet service provider, and had a lot of insight around some of the changes from IPv4 to V6, where basically it gave rise to the Internet of Things. Did a lot of work with a telecommunications company in the UK around a number of different applications of the Internet of Things, but that gave rise to Audiowings, looking at how, as a wearable technology platform, we could really start to provide relevant audio, understand personalized data, and then start to really marry the two to provide really frictionless audible experiences for edge devices, specifically headphones that were connected and completely independent of smartphones.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about Audiowings, because I know that's your company. So tell us a little bit about it.
So I guess in fact, kind of two influences took place when I started the company. So firstly, I was doing a lot of work with Internet of Things, looking at the added utility that we could provide inanimate objects based on them having a network interface. And so that gave rise in my head to thinking about all the different types of devices that could provide much more utility, much more compelling experience should they be connected to the internet. And that was back in about 2010, 2011. But then also, I used to wear headphones when going to the gym, specifically Bluetooth headphones. And I used to have them tethered to my smartphone to listen to great music to motivate me, specifically from Spotify. And I remember, without going into too much painful detail, I was standing in front of a mirror doing some dumbbell curls, looking at myself like the fool that I was at the time. Basically, I remember having my smartphone underneath my bench. Basically, the audio that I was listening to started to fade away slowly. I turned and had stolen my smartphone. So it basically got me thinking, once the frustration had subsided, that I don't really want a smartphone in this context. All I really want is my favorite music straight in my ears with nothing in the way. So that started me thinking around how we could unbundle the phone from its audio capabilities. And I guess in a long roundabout way, that gave rise to where we're at now with Audiowings, really trying to provide really relevant audio directly from platforms such as the mainstream music providers that is relevant based on the physiological insight that we glean from an end user who obviously uses our headphones.
Yeah, it's so interesting that it's like you, as this person with a deep understanding of, like the burgeoning world of the Internet of Things and how exactly one would unbundle the smartphone, has this life instance where, you get your phone stolen and you're like, all right, how do I actually do this? How do I make this work? So, for the audience out there, Carl and I have, this is actually the first time that we've ever really talked face to face over Zoom.
Carl's based in hurts, man.
Yeah, no. So Carl's based in London, and what's cool though is it's like, when you're in a niche of a niche, I'm in hearables, so being a niche of wearables, you sort of start to familiarize yourself with who's who on social media. And Carl's been active for a few years, as have I, and I've gotten to know him, and just like I really like his thinking. And so when I decided to do the podcast, I was like, looking at, the list of people that I wanted to bring on, and Carl was, first and foremost for my hearables people that I wanted to bring on, because I think he has a really interesting perspective. And, I think one of the things that I wanted to start out with this conversation is your relationship with Nick Hunn. Nick Hunn being the analyst who actually coined the term hearables. He and Carl know each other, and Carl's had a good chance to kind of get to know him and his thinking. And so I thought we'd maybe start there. Tell us a little bit about like what you've learned from Nick in the time that you've spent with him.
Yeah, sure. So to give a bit of context, when I started my company back in 2012, there wasn't really a wearables market in London. And I say that in the sense that there are a lot of people thinking about wearables, but really there weren't people who were coming together as a community talking about some of the pertinent challenges that wearables in different applications in different markets were having to try to get market penetration. So I set up a community of wearable enthusiasts called Hearables London. And it was really just a good chance to get engineers, entrepreneurs, investors, people that were just enthused in wearables and Internet of Things together to have a chat around their application in specific markets. And our very first event, Nick was my very first speaker, talking a bit more about a lot of his research at the time. And this was prior to his seminal paper where he talked about the evolution of hearing aids to become hearables, broadly speaking. But Nick announced himself as someone who is he announced himself as someone who's done everything with Wi-Fi in terms of incorporating into snowplows right through to dildos. So from it got my attention. But at the same time, obviously based on what I was doing, we were talking a lot around the evolution of headphones and talking a lot about the extra utility that it could provide. And he then, at the start of 2014, announced his white paper whereby he looked at, from his perspective, the evolution of hearing aids, especially incorporating some of the Bluetooth stack into them to provide extra utility and experiences. And then what that would look like should they evolve to provide a number of different applications, broadly speaking, in the health sector. So I think that kind of obviously gave us a lot of a common ground to talk about what we've both been thinking about separately. But then from my perspective, that paper only went so far in terms of giving us an insight into his thinking. I've been really privileged to have a number of chats with him. And I think the thing that he's been really keen to understand is actually what's this ongoing experience, this extra utility that we can provide on a regular basis over and above the physical product. And when you speak to him about different types of hearables that have come to market, over the last kind of 5-6 years, he's been healthily skeptical about their prospects purely because he sees the potential of hearables as being something whereby they can provide an ongoing experience and utility to people to really help solve some of these grand life challenges that we have.
Yeah. And, this idea of a platform, right? It's like as the world becomes more subscription based, it's like every single day, it seems like the world becomes a little bit more subscription oriented. This idea of Hearables as a platform is a really intriguing idea. And one example that I'll give for that is the idea of hearing aids, as a subscription. Think of it as you as an individual have some type of, if you have some type of hearing loss, you have a very unique type of hearing loss in a way that in of itself is like a prescription, right? And so your hearing care provider determines your prescription, and then they program you with your, call it your medicine, call it your hearing aid, but it's that calibrated frequency, like the whole way in which I'm blanking on the word, the audiogram, the audiometric configuration of your hearing. And so you think about this as a platform, right? So a lot of the hesitancy with buying a hearing aid comes with the sticker shock that's associated with the high price point because it's an upfront payment. So rather than that, what if you actually unbundle the hearing aid and the device itself costs X amount of money, and then you're paying on a monthly basis for your prescription, right? You're paying for that pre-programmed, that's catered specifically to you, and it changes over time because your hearing loss tends to depreciate over time. And so you have this hearing aid that is more or less a widget, but it is on a subscription basis that you're subscribing to your prescription. And like, that's just one example of this idea of how these types of in the ear devices, whether it be from a medical application or more of a consumer application, you can start to see ways in which you can actually layer subscriptions and such and truly make these things platforms.
Absolutely. And I think, Nick, that's a very niche and incredibly compelling example of how absolutely a platform could be beneficial within a hearable, specific to obviously looking at the monitoring and the ability to overcome, to an extent, hearing loss. And I think when he was looking at hearables being a platform, he obviously foresaw the evolution of hearables to include a number of different sensors, whether they be optical modules, whether they be EEG or ECG or even EKG. So I think from that perspective, he kind of foresaw the fact that the ear as a physiological playground could give whoever was part of the ecosystem a lot of insight into physiologically what someone was going through at a period of time. But then also because obviously things on our ears are being worn now, I think there's average is up to about 3 hours a day. then that trend can give someone a lot more insight as to someone's emotional state and personality to an extent over a long period of time. So yeah, he absolutely foresaw that.
It's interesting. You said two really interesting things there. First of all, you mentioned that we're wearing these devices for longer periods of time, and that is such a astute observation that I think needs to be more widely understood. And I think a lot of that's being ushered in by AirPods, but it should definitely be recognized that really, as of 2016, 2017, and now up to modern day, each year it's becoming more socially acceptable to wear something in your ears for longer periods of time.
Absolutely.
It's like, and I think even 5 years ago, this would have been something where it's like, take your headphones out. Now it's like, well, I can still communicate with you face to face, even though you have your AirPods in, just because that's become socially normalized.
And I think actually that predates AirPods, because if you look at major influences around headphone consumption and headphone use broadly speaking, you look at the rise in streaming music. I mean, Spotify now has over 100 million paying customers on a monthly basis, right? But 79% of their content is consumed on a mobile device. It's consumed via headphones. So obviously when people have access to content because it's ubiquitous in nature, they're going to consume as much of it as they possibly can. Also as well, you think about the overarching macro reasons as to why people are consuming audio content on the move. You look at, and I keep on kind of defaulting back to health as a kind of a trend, but as a sector, but you have now globally 350 million people who are suffering from some form of mental health challenge. In the UK alone, there's a 35 billion loss of productivity to UK PLC because of mental health. But at the same time, you have millennials who you have about 64% of millennials that use audio as a way to overcome stress, anxiety, and depression. And when I say I'm really talking about music specifically. So you look at the function of music as a technology or as a tool to overcome these things. And obviously they're going to tap into it because of its ubiquity in nature and because of the fact that it's harmless. So there are key influences around our rise in consumption of audio, broadly speaking, which can really take you into different rabbit holes, broadly speaking.
Totally. Well, you make a good point there. And it's like that coincides with it's like people already have the desire to be wearing these things for as long as they can.
Yep.
And it's just a matter of like the hardware permits it. So you can do that. So the other really interesting thing that you said there is that the ear is a physiological playground. And that is it's a really good point, because the ear is a extremely unique position in the body to gather biometric data. And the reason being is that it straddles sort of the inside of your body and the outside of your body. So a lot of the things that you can gather from the Apple Watch, whether it be things because it's making constant contact with your body, you can get your heart rate, you can get now you'll be able to soon get your blood pressure, these kinds of things through like the optical sensors. They can also gather, like they would be able to maybe detect things that are in your actual vicinity, like potentially dangerous pathogens in the air or something like that. Now, where those sort of limitations start to arise with the proximity or where you're wearing that on your body is that it's not being worn inside of your body. So an example of why the ear would be more advantageous would be something like your body temperature. So your tympanic membrane radiates your body temperature, and therefore if you have something that's sitting down in, with a sensor down in your ear canal, you would be able to get that metric from the from that type of biometric sensor. And
Absolutely.
you think about the way in which it's a lot of cartilage, there's the way that the head moves, it's actually a pretty stable part of the body. There's a lot of really interesting aspects to why the ears are a good place to gather that data.
Yeah, and I think also as well, one of the things that, again, Nick alluded to, but I think Poppy Crum, who's chief scientist from Dolby, talks about in a lot of detail. She talks about the ear being a USB port, basically, a biological USB.
I love that.
Yeah, it's incredible. So when you think about EEG applications, when you think about understanding alpha brainwaves, when you think about understanding stressors, when you think about understanding when you're in a state of relaxation, you can really start to provide so much more utility, so much more compelling content experiences based on understanding your emotional state, which can glean from so many different physiological attributes these days from the ear. And I think, as you touched upon, that's incredibly compelling. But then also from a clinical perspective, there are so many different elements which you can start to using either neural networks or some form of either local or cloud-based machine learning, really get a lot of insight around your predisposition to kind of clinical conditions based on the attributes you can pick up from the ear. And, as I said, when you're wearing these things for, 3, 4, up to 5 hours a day in some instances, that's a lot of insight you can start to glean around someone's health, broadly speaking, just from an earbud, which in essence could be a widget to a much more grandiose service.
And, so with that, it's like, I think one of the things that I don't want to say, like, I don't like using the adage like people are sleeping on it, but I think that one of the more maybe less discussed aspects of wearables is what could potentially be this idea of truly individualized longitudinal data sets. You think about, so if I'm going to be recording my heart rate with my Apple Watch, or if I'm going to be wearing a set of hearing aids that have biometric sensors on them that can capture that, or if I'm going to be wearing AirPods or any other of the hearables that have these types of sensors embedded in them, and they're all becoming embedded with these sensors.
Yes.
You think about, you get that, so as of today, if you're not wearing any kind of wearable, you're going to be charting that metric about once to twice a year whenever you go and you see your physician, right? Like that's the only time of the year that you're actually going to be jotting down, or your physician's going to be doing it on your behalf. And what wearables does is it creates those readouts on the minute, on the hour, 365 days a year. And that is a really profound thing, because now we're talking about, you have a clear vision into all of these different metrics that these things are capturing for years on end. And you really
Absolutely.
start to get an idea of what your health patterns look like. You can see, clearly in the data. You can probably see, if you're well versed in that, and you understand what you're looking at, you can probably visualize in the data, that's when I was sick.
Absolutely. And I think when you look at some of the big macro trends that are taking place in developed countries, and when you look at the States, for example, you think about um, the stressors or the challenges of the health infrastructure that's there. I mean, you have, over the last 30 years, hospital beds have declined by 23%. I think it's from 1.2 million to now 900,000. You look at the population increasing by 30% in a similar time frame. So you think naturally there's going to be obviously a disparity in terms of how, as an infrastructure, you can start to provide a level of care which is of the same level of quality for this increased population. But then also you start to think about how the top 5% super users of the healthcare infrastructure are really accounting for around half of the dollars spent in providing this kind of level of care. And the only real way in which you can start to provide some form of quality of care is actually if you start to look at understanding and diagnosing to an extent, and maybe even prescribing some form of clinical care prior to someone actually coming into a hospital, prior to someone becoming an inpatient. And for that, you need some form of remote monitoring system, call it wearables, call it telehealth, whatever you want, to then start to understand that from a physiological perspective before someone actually has to become an inpatient, and you then go obviously through your care process. The same thing's happening in the UK, but yeah, wearables really do stand to provide a real benefit in society over and above just monitoring your steps.
So I want to pivot a little bit here as we sort of wrap. I want to read a really interesting Twitter thread that you put out. It actually prompted me to write. Back in June, I wrote 2 blog posts on this. I wrote one piece, and then you rebutted it a little bit. You're like, that wasn't entirely what I meant. And then it prompted me to write a second piece.
I apologize. I probably
it was good. I mean, it was one of the more thought-provoking things I had seen at the time. And it was and to this day, I still think about it. But it's because it piggybacks on what we were just saying, where it's this idea of, biometric data, right? And all this health data. And the thing about all this is that when you talk about this, it tends to solicit a knee-jerk reaction of, I'm not sure I feel comfortable with that data being out there, and
Absolutely.
I think really address this in this thread. And so this thread, it's in reference to the TV show Halt and Catch Fire. In the show, the main character, Joe McMillan, one of the key points in the first season is he's, got this great idea. And it's sort of at the dawn of the, computer, like right around the dawn of the internet. he never explicitly says that this is in reference to the internet. I think it's kind of implied that it could be something else, but he says,
Yeah.
real coolly, he's like, computers aren't the thing. Computers are the thing that gives you access to the thing. And so it's interesting though, because, you basically took that and you riffed off it a little bit and you said, here, I'll read this here. You said, I believe the true benefit of wearables over and above the computers in our pockets is their constant physical contact to the body. This is an obvious statement, but bear with me. Seismic shifts in human behavior brought about by technology seem to happen when trends collide, i.e. social media platforms coming about due to the WordPress-esque do-it-yourself web builders and the proliferation of high-speed internet access via DSL. I truly feel that we're on the edge of another massive trend, this time involving wearables and blockchain and the incredible crypto pioneered internet native business models that are starting to come about. We're already comfortable with getting an Apple Watch subsidized by our insurance, with Fitbits given to new employees to enable productivity. Just like Web 2.0, we are the product here, and our data is the currency. So thinking forward a few years, I can envision a platform that values the attention we give to wearables and our hearables through the data we give up. But it is underpinned by some form of tokenized ecosystem, enabling us to truly gain value from our attention. I in no way can take credit for this. The writings of Hearing McClaverty have really helped me to crystallize my thoughts here. Now, I appreciate that this is far-fetched, but the first and still best use cases for blockchain is as a digital ledger to record transaction. Due to the ear being, as Nick Hunn used to say, a physiological playground and with constant contact to the skin, underpinned by a distributed ledger that tokenizes our attention in a wholly transparent, permissioned, and reversible manner, the concept to use your emotion as a currency is fascinating and the applications are vast. Wow.
I don't know who wrote that, but it didn't sound like my words.
You're like, I hear and read that. my Twitter thread was actually hijacked that day. That wasn't me. But no, do you want to expand on that a little bit, because it's a really intriguing. I mean, it's not every day that you hear somebody relate the blockchain to wearables, but they are, in a lot of ways you actually, if you think about it, the two would make a lot of sense in working in conjunction.
Absolutely. So I think there's a number of people that have looked at how distributed ledgers and how tokenized ecosystems, broadly speaking, that can actually provide a pathway to self-actualization, which is an incredibly grandiose concept. But I think when you start to look at how we are using consumer devices, how we're using consumer applications, we now know as consumers that we are the product. We now know that the value to these applications, these manufacturers to an extent, is actually our data. We know that our data is valuable. We know that we're not either consciously or actively giving permission to this data. And also we definitely know that we're not part of the revenue share of how that data is monetized. So I think, with stuff like Cambridge Analytica, the scandal that took place here, there's a lot more thinking now around, okay, look, how can we start to either step back from these ecosystems, these platforms that just use us as a product, and also how can we still start to provide value or obtain value, from our data in a way whereby it benefits us to an extent, either from an insight perspective or even ideally from a financial perspective. So I think when I was thinking about that, and obviously we've been thinking about that and trying to conceptualize it for a good couple of years now, the thing that I was really concerned by was the fact that if, as what's happened now, Apple have moved into headphones, Microsoft moved into headphones, Samsung, etc. If all the big 4-5 manufacturers start moving into a space whereby they can feasibly use headphones as another endpoint to capture physiological data about it, which is inherently individual, then they're going to have incredible amounts of insight around us individually that we probably won't have any share in. So how can we as a platform provider start to understand, and in a permissioned and also transparent manner, start to really bring on board consumers to really start to get value out of their data in a way whereby it improves their experience, A. But then B, if consumers are starting to use headphones, hearables for a much longer period of time to consume content, most notably music, how can we then start to use as part of that ecosystem, how can we start to provide, to musicians a fair and equitable revenue share for the content we're consuming from their art, So looking at providing and developing a fair ecosystem that involves consumers, but then also involves all the route to market partners, be it manufacturers, be it distributors, as well as also the content creators, be it musicians, be it even their recording labels, or be it podcast authors, in that sense whereby everyone is fairly provided or compensated for the time and the value and the talent they provide into that whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I loved when you said that seismic shifts in human behavior brought about by technology seem to happen when trends collide. And you're right. I mean, we really are on, it feels as if like as we head into the 2020s, like that we are sort of at this point where we're kind of now, it would seem ready for a lot of these new trends to start to sort of emerge and
Yeah.
collide. And so
And
I think you're right.
I think, so I was going to say, just to kind of amplify that slightly, I think the internet has been obviously a transformational planetary shift in terms of how we can start to collaborate, communicate, etc. I don't need to, make that point, obviously, but I think it's been beholden to the whims of a business model which is it's outgrown in terms of advertising. Mm-hmm. So, my perspective, the real benefits of tokenization is that it gives a completely different revenue model to internet first-esque devices and applications. So from my perspective, how can we then start to look at the benefits of this and the value we can provide to people who are already consuming great content, happy to give up their data to provide that extra utility, and also people that are really providing that content, that art, to bring us into this ecosystem in a way whereby we're providing our attention and we're trying to obviously extract value from that. And I think, the tokenization of physiology gives me a lot of joy around trying to develop something which can then fairly provide value to all actors in this ecosystem.
Hearables aren't the thing. Hearables are the thing that gives you access to the thing.
Joe himself be proud.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Carl. That was awesome. I really appreciated this conversation. Thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for everybody that tuned in here to the end. We will chat with you next time. Cheers.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.